Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and its Shameless Cover-Up, by Katie Pavlich. Narrated by Emily Durante. Copyright 2012 by Katie Pavlich. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Regnery Publishing and was produced in the year 2012 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Introduction. By ATF Special Agent J. Dobbins. When it became known that the weapons found at the ambush murder scene of United States Border Patrol agent Brian Terry had willingly been allowed to pass through the hands of my agency during Operation Fast and Furious, all of my peers were in shock and disbelief. I wasn't. In the years leading up to the tragedy in Pet Canyon, Arizona, just a few miles down the road from where I grew up, I had become a first-hand witness to the decay of the federal law enforcement agency I love and had dedicated my entire adult life to serving, the United States Department of Justice's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. When I became an ATF agent 25 years ago, I was hired on to an agency administered by hard men with hard-earned law enforcement experience. Many ATF managers had been trained in the responsibilities of policing in prior careers as local patrol officers and detectives. ATF agents brought with them a real-life understanding of what it meant to be a cop, how to run investigations and handle informants, all the elements of cops and robbers. As they moved up the ranks, they carried themselves with enormous self-esteem and confidence, having cut their teeth as real policemen well before becoming federal agents. They were full of pride that they had earned their stripes by getting in the weeds as investigators. They were intelligent and experienced lawmen who eventually rose to positions of influence in ATF. As ATF managers, they were fearless men who knew what it felt like to have a criminal point a gun in their face. They had chased drug dealers down alleys, wrestling them to the ground. They had left wives and babies behind at home while diligently spending endless days and nights on stakeouts, with nothing more to show for it than a back seat full of fast food wrappers. They had kicked in doors as point men on search warrants, unsure of what waited for them on the other side. They grew beards and bought guns and bombs under cover from society's most dangerous felons. They were policemen and law enforcement officers first and foremost, executive bureaucrats a distant second. These are the people who once directed ATF. Were they perfect? Of course not. Did they make mistakes? You bet they did. But they called the shots and were not afraid to make decisions. They didn't feel they had to run to a government attorney to tell them what was, or was not, the right thing to do. They didn't conduct secret, hidden, surreptitious programs, because they didn't have to. Our mission was clear and pure, and they demanded we hold to it. In the rookie agents they interviewed and hired, the old dogs looked for and expected a standard of performance and courage equal to their own. There was a sense of mentorship. They cared about their people. They were demanding of them, but with a sense of compassion for new agents trying to learn and make their way. ATF agents were street cops with gold badges. We played hard, but worked harder. We would join forces with our federal, state, and local partners and never care about who claimed the stats. We were just churning and burning to put the bad guys behind bars. It's not entirely clear when or why things changed, but it is perfectly clear that they did. Every veteran ATF agent knows it happened. Some people claim it began after ATF's raid of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas in 1993. Some say it was when government was realigned and ATF was moved from the Treasury Department to the Department of Justice in 2003. Either way, the hardness of the ATF began to dissolve and was replaced by a more intellectual and deceptive view of how we investigate crime. The old bosses who stuffed worn-out six-shot Smith & Wesson revolvers in the back waistband of their Sears & Roebuck suits were being replaced by bosses with well-polished Sig Sauers and slick monogrammed shirts with cufflinks, who were very careful not to let any gun oil get on their Armani jackets. Bosses who wore jeans and cowboy boots to work were being pushed out by newcomers with dockers and tasseled loafers. The mentality of the agency shifted from down-and-dirty everyday police work pursuing criminals to a newer, cleaner version where statistics and appearance reigned supreme. While we once chased after felons with guns and scraped our knees doing it, we were now encouraged to sit behind computer screens and electronically investigate syndicates. The old bosses who had spent a dozen years on the street perfecting the craft of being ATF agents were supplanted by 2- and 3-year wunderkinds. Street knowledge was no longer important. The agents who got promoted were the ones who wore suits and ties rather than street work clothes. ATF agents were routinely promoted into management without any experience of slapping handcuffs on a suspect, writing an affidavit for a search warrant, or testifying in a criminal court. New administrators were chosen not on the basis of experience and performance in the field, but on test scores, and many chose to sit and study for tests and get promoted, rather than do the traditional down-and-dirty work of an old-style ATF agent. You get a reputation as a cop. Failing on the street is devastating. It creates danger for the officer and risk to his partners. When it became impossible for some ATF agents to cut it on the street, they took the early-up option, worked on getting good test scores, and were promoted. Without real street experience, many became the equivalent of third-grade teachers with guns. They took attendance and graded reports with no real understanding what an agent does and how he or she does it. Some of those chosen began to climb the government's corporate ladder. They nodded approval to the bad ideas of those above them, for fear of being knocked off their personal ascent. They took care of each other and defended or ignored failed leadership because, after all, I could be next. Ultimately, some of the yes men with empty character and empty experience landed in positions of significant influence. They told agents how to do their jobs, even if they were often failed street agents themselves. As supervisors, they looked down on field agents and were unwilling to listen to questions, take advice, or hear complaints from anyone ranked below them. The common response from executives to questions or complaints: "You don't understand the big picture. Now that I am an executive and you are a mere street hump, I am right and you are wrong." The attitude was, "My title is more important than yours, therefore I know more than you." The ATF became a series of micro-agencies and branches where special agents in charge, SACs, built personal law enforcement empires in their divisions, making their own rules and disregarding law, policy, and many times common sense. That style of management became rampant, and once that tiger was out of the cage, none of the new cat-tamer pseudo-directors could figure out how to get it back in. The ATF was viewed internally as a law enforcement Titanic. No matter what happened, the leaders felt their ship was unsinkable. Just weather the storms and we'll be fine. A series of short-term directors and even more prevalent temporary acting directors were imported to captain the ship. Then, like the Titanic, the luxury liner ATF, commanded by incompetent captains, hit an iceberg, fast and furious. As has been demonstrated in the ATF Phoenix Field Division, the direction and motivation of the ATF became grossly perverted and tangled in unjust personal philosophies. The ATF's special agent in charge at the Phoenix Field Division apparently decided that he was going to dictate American policy on gun-related border violence. His incompetence was not just tolerated, it was defended, and when Fast and Furious became an embarrassment, his superiors pretended they were unaware and far from the scene of the crime. Many people in the ATF saw what was happening and tried to warn the Bureau, but the new corrupt and arrogant culture of management had become too powerful and intimidating. Field agents who spoke up were punished for having an opinion and daring to voice it. Whistleblowers had their reputations, careers, and finances shattered. Others of higher ranks knew the wreck was about to happen, but dared not open their mouths because they feared doing the right thing might jeopardize a future promotion. So much has changed. So much of what we once admired in our leadership, in simplest terms, courage and confidence, was replaced by a lack of accountability and a management culture of denial and cover-up. There is no place for any person who carries a badge and gun in our country to display the dire lack of testicular fortitude seen recently in the ATF. Ours is not the business for cowards, sissies, or liars. The ATF is an agency that I will always love, but it has disappointed me and many agents. We are better than this, much better. We have a proud history of standing up against the most violent predators in our communities. Even in the wake of Operations Wide Receiver and Fast and Furious, ATF agents continue to outperform agents from other federal agencies in the per capita production of investigations, operations, arrests, indictments, and prosecutions. The ATF has always been proud to do more with less, but today the accomplishments of ATF agents are rarely due to our leadership, but more likely in spite of it. Once, while assisting the DEA on a plan for an undercover operation to buy drugs from a suspect, I spoke up as an ATF agent. I hope that he shows up high and with a pipe bomb in one pocket and a sawed-off shotgun in the other. You would have thought I had just slit the throat of the family dog. But this is the mentality of true and good ATF agents everywhere. We have jurisdiction to chase explosives, illegal weapons, and drugs, and I simply wanted to have a chance to go against the worst of the worst. That was not bravado. I'm nobody's hero. It was the mentality that I had been trained in. I was proud to take the fight to the streets on behalf of the ATF, and more important, on behalf of America's citizens. It is what we do. The ATF no longer resembles the agency that hired me in 1987. Yes, in some ways the evolution has been a positive one, but in so many critical ways it is worse. I don't believe the cop mentality of my predecessors is gone. It has simply been overrun by executives who lost their way and never cared to find their way back. What we have gained in technology has been offset by a leadership that lost the edge of old-school lawmen. I hope and pray that the media, the American taxpayer, and Congress will combine forces to reform the ATF and restore its professionalism and capability to execute its unique mission, a mission very few seem to understand. We are not anti-gun. We are anti-crime. We are not in the business of prohibiting or punishing law-abiding gun ownership. We are in the business of bringing to justice those criminals who use guns to murder, rape, extort, and deal drugs. It's not the ATF's duty to engage in a debate about the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Our mission is to enforce the law, and that is a mission that everyone should be able to support. There is a right way and a wrong way for an ATF agent to go about his or her business. Of late, the wrong way has been revealed. Through accountability, oversight, and a restoration of good management, we at the ATF can return to the right way of handling America's business. When we do, we will re-win the faith and trust of the American people. Rest in peace, Brian Terry. Your sacrifice to our country is highlighting and changing the way that we in law enforcement conduct ourselves. Every good law enforcement officer out there is grateful for that. ATF Special Agent J. Dobbins, February 2012. Chapter 1. A Warrior's Death. I do not fear death, for I have been close enough to it on enough occasions that it no longer concerns me. What I do fear is the loss of my honor, and would rather die fighting than to have it said that I was without courage. Poem by Lieutenant Colonel Watt, found on the desk of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry. Elite Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry's mother, Josephine, was looking forward to her son spending Christmas at home in Michigan for the first time in years. In the early morning of December 15, 2010, her telephone rang. There would be no more thoughts of a happy Christmas. Instead, the family gathered in Detroit on December 21 for Brian's funeral. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, a former governor of Arizona, offered Josephine condolences on behalf of the president for her fallen son. Brian Terry spent the last moments of his life doing his duty. On a chilly December night, 45 minutes before his shift was scheduled to end, Terry was part of a team of elite Border Patrol agents converging on Arizona's Peck Canyon, 18 miles north of the Mexican border. Vast and intemperate, the southern Arizona desert is one of the most inhospitable areas in the world. Much of the desert can be reached only by aircraft or on foot. The forbidding environment, coupled with a chronic shortage of border security personnel, has made it an ideal route for drug smugglers, illegal immigrants, and human traffickers. The small towns along southern Arizona's Interstates 10 and 8 between Yuma and Phoenix, Casa Grande, Arizona City, Maricopa, Hidden Valley, Eloy, and Stanfield used to be ranching and farming communities. Now they are the stash houses, and their small access roads are the smuggling routes for the Mexican drug cartels. The cartels operate with something close to impunity, and the Arizona farmers who remain in the area must carry weapons, and some wear bulletproof vests to protect themselves. In south-central Arizona, Lieutenant Matthew Thomas of the Pinal County Sheriff Department's SWAT team has seen cartel members become increasingly defiant. "These guys are ready for a confrontation," Thomas told me one afternoon as I joined him on a patrol. "They have no issue directing violence toward law enforcement." Indeed, some officials believe that Border Patrol agents are being targeted for assassination by the drug cartels. In addition, deputies like Thomas confront so-called RIP crews, freelance criminals who raid the cartel's traffickers. The victims' bodies are sometimes found months, even years later. The trafficking of drugs and illegal immigrants across the border is on a massive scale. In 2010, in the Tucson sector alone, nearly 400 tons of marijuana were seized, and 180,000 illegal immigrants were apprehended. 133 people were listed as victims of the undeclared border war. It is assumed that for all the hundreds of tons of drugs that are captured, hundreds of tons more make it across. And for all the hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants who are caught, hundreds of thousands more evade law enforcement. Moreover, turf wars between the Mexican cartels have put Arizonans in the crossfire. In one notorious example in 2010, longtime Arizona rancher Robert Krentz was found shot dead, along with his dog, one day after authorities seized nearly 300 pounds of marijuana close to his ranch. His suspected killer fled back to Mexico. In June 2010, Pinal County Sheriff Paul Babu declared flatly that parts of Arizona were under the cartel's control. The Department of Homeland Security responded by posting signs along desert routes that stated, "Travel caution, smuggling and illegal immigration may be encountered in this area." The Obama administration was willing, de facto, to cede control of parts of southern Arizona to Mexican organized crime. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, standing in front of one of the travel caution signs, protested that these signs calling our desert an active drug and human struggling area are 80 miles away from the border and only 30 miles away from Arizona's capital. This is an outrage. That same month, the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife closed 3,500 acres of the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge that stretches into the Arizona desert from the Mexican border. Because of the Mexican drug cartels, the area was deemed too dangerous for tourists. So, by concession of the Obama administration, parts of Arizona are now officially off-limits to American citizens. Peck Canyon, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border near Nogales, Arizona, used to be a safe place for native Arizonans to live, camp, and hunt. Today, however, drug gang shootouts, armed robbery, and other heinous crimes have become nearly common occurrences because of Mexican criminals. Kids don't play alone outside. Their parents fear they will be kidnapped, and few adults venture outside without a loaded pistol. The drug cartels consider southern Arizona a base of operations. They have a vast intelligence network of informers. Spotters sit atop hills and mountains with cell phones and radios, identifying where sheriff's vehicles and border patrol squads are located. In the late hours of December 14, 2010, they spotted Brian Terry. Agent Terry understood that the men he might encounter on patrol were not Boy Scouts. In Mexico, cartel members have no problem using roadside IEDs, murdering women, killing children, beheading people, and dissolving their victims' bodies in caustic soda. They also possess an arsenal of weapons that exceeds the small arms inventory of almost any nation in the world. Brian Terry had joined the United States Marine Corps straight out of high school. After being honorably discharged in 1994, he again held up his hand and swore an oath, this time to serve as a police officer in the Detroit suburbs of Ecorse and Lincoln Park. In 2007, after receiving a degree in criminal justice, Brian joined the U.S. Border Patrol. He was a strong, competitive, handsome, courageous, funny, and incredibly patriotic American, a cousin recalled. Tall and brawny, Brian still had the bearing of a military man. He cropped his hair close, much as he had in the Marines. Because of his law enforcement and military background, Brian was recruited for an elite Special Operations Group of the Border Patrol known as the U.S. Border Patrol Tactical Unit, or by its acronym, BORTAC. Comprised of specialized SWAT teams that undergo grueling training regimens, the agents provide rapid response to emergency situations. They were the only units with the training and expertise to operate in the Arizona wilderness, no man's land, in the dark of night. As a trainee, Brian Terry was a standout. He was once told by his instructor that he had done a task incorrectly. The penalty was a 3-mile run in the unforgiving heat of the American Southwest. And he had to do it while carrying 50 pounds of tactical gear and another recruit across his shoulders. When Brian was 1 mile into the run, the instructor discovered that he had in fact made the mistake, not Brian. He told Brian he could stop running. Brian refused. "I'll never quit a task until it is finished," he said. It was due to such exploits that his friends and co-workers nicknamed Brian Superman. He seemed to be able to do anything. Though Brian and his team routinely wore night vision goggles, they did not need them on December 14. The evening was cloudless, and Peck Canyon was illuminated by the light of a half-moon. In the distance, Brian's squad spotted 5 bandits, each armed with an AK-47 rifle. The agents approached cautiously, near silently, before shouting, "United States Border Patrol, drop your weapons." Instead, the bandits prepared to fire. As required by Border Patrol regulations, Brian and the other agents fired beanbags as warning shots. Their enemies weren't firing beanbags. What Brian Terry's family did not know, as they tried to cope with the loss of their son during Christmas 2010, was that the AK-47 that had fired the round that killed Brian had been sold to the Mexican drug cartels under the supervision of the United States government, and that the weapon sale was only one deadly part of a terrible scandal overseen by the Obama administration itself, which had intentionally funneled arms to the drug cartel's borderland killers. Josephine Terry and millions of bewildered Americans who followed the story in the news were left with one haunting question: why? Chapter 2. Clinging to their guns. It's not surprising, then, they get bitter. They cling to guns, or religion, or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment, as a way to explain their frustrations. Barack Obama, April 2008. Only the high-dollar liberal donors gathered in the room were supposed to have heard Barack Obama's now infamous attack on the people of small-town Pennsylvania. Speaking at a fundraiser in San Francisco on April 6, 2008, the improbable front-runner in the Democratic presidential primaries tried to explain why Midwestern blue-collar voters were not voting for him. True to form, Obama blamed others rather than himself. You go into these small towns in Pennsylvania, and, like a lot of small towns in the Midwest, the jobs have been gone now for 25 years, and nothing's replaced them, Obama said, so people there get bitter and cling to guns or religion. Obama's off-the-cuff comments stirred outrage. His Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton though no friend of gun owners herself, denounced Obama's views, saying they were not reflective of the values and beliefs of Americans. The comments did, however, appear to be reflective of the values and beliefs of Barack Obama. An antipathy to guns and gun owners is part of Obama's DNA. More than once in his memoir, Dreams from My Father, Obama refers to white men, their guns, and the trouble they bring. Obama recounts stories told by his Kenyan grandmother about white men who appeared with rifles and terrorized the African villages of his ancestors. Even before he sought public office, Barack Obama was on a mission to subvert the Second Amendment and deprive gun owners of their constitutional rights. In law school, he was mentored by liberal legal scholar Lawrence H. Tribe, who at the time was a fervent opponent of gun rights. Obama, Tribe recalled, was the best student I ever had. In 1994, Obama joined the board of the Joyce Foundation, a liberal-leaning organization so active in advocating restrictions on gun ownership that it is known as the anti-NRA. Community organizer Obama was also associated with the Independent Voters of Illinois Independent Precinct Organization, a group that supports gun control and the right of municipalities to ban sales or possession of handguns and assault weapons. Another director of the group was the Obama's close friend, Valerie Jarrett. Jarrett was Deputy Chief of Staff to Chicago Mayor Richard Daley and was a major supporter of the city's handgun ban. As a politician in Chicago, Obama racked up a consistent record of supporting restrictions on gun ownership. For instance, in 1999, Obama was quoted by the Chicago Defender newspaper at an anti-gun rally proposing a 500% increase in federal taxes on the sale of firearm ammunition. In 2000, as an Illinois state senator, Obama co-sponsored legislation to limit law-abiding citizens to the purchase of one handgun a month. In 2003, Obama voted for a bill banning the private ownership of hunting shotguns, target rifles, and black powder rifles in Illinois. In 2004, the Illinois state legislature passed a law that permitted citizens to defend themselves and others with a gun at their home or business, even if local ordinances prohibited gun ownership. The bill came in response to a celebrated case where a father, at home with his children, had shot at a burglar who had broken into their house. 54-year-old Hale DeMar was charged with violating a local ordinance after shooting a burglar who was in the process of robbing his Chicago area home. The intruder, a convicted felon named Mario Billings, had entered his house through the kitchen door, tripping an alarm system. Mr. DeMar, a local restaurateur, was in the house at the time with his two young children. When DeMar came across the man attempting to steal a flat-screen computer monitor, he opened fire with a .38 caliber pistol, shooting the burglar in the shoulder. Billings made his way out of the house and into one of DeMar's vehicles and drove himself to a hospital where he was arrested. Mr. DeMar was also charged with a crime, violating a local ordinance that prohibited handgun ownership. The action sparked controversy across Illinois. In response, the state legislature passed a law, SB 2165, ordering that local gun bans could not be enforced in cases where the gun owner could prove the weapon was being used in self-defense or the defense of another while in his home or place of business. That legislation passed the Illinois State Senate by an overwhelming margin. Barack Obama, then a state senator, voted against the law, twice. Obama has long believed one of the best solutions to crime prevention is the reinstatement of the Clinton-era assault weapons ban. Despite the politically inflammatory name, guns under the category of assault weapons have existed for more than a century and have been used by millions of Americans for target shooting and, in some cases, self-defense. During his campaign for the United States Senate in 2004, Obama called President Bush's refusal to renew the ban a scandal. Once in the U.S. Senate, Obama voted against legislation to protect firearms distributors, manufacturers, and local gun dealers from lawsuits for crimes committed with guns and ammunition they lawfully sold. In his second memoir, The Audacity of Hope, Obama expanded on his views. I believe in keeping guns out of our inner cities and that our leaders must say so in the face of the gun manufacturers' lobby, he wrote.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?